The Sydneyist, the best radio show on Sydney in the whole, well, I was going to say eastern suburbs, but I'm going to say in the history of humanity, possibly the universe. We like here at The Sydneyist to apply much curiosity, a smidgen of cheek, and definitely no whinging. I'm Elizabeth Farrelly, and we're broadcasting here from the Alan Slate studio at Eastside Radio on 89.7 FM, or streaming on eastsidefm.org. Thank you to Tony for the promo, and thank you to Sophie Kennedy-White, our producer. Tonight we're talking about planning, specifically planning Sydney, and the question, should developers be allowed to evade the rules, basically, to build very small, sunless apartments? Is this a good thing or a bad thing? First, though, some snippets of planning and slightly other sorts of news. New South Wales anti-democratic protest laws are once again under the spotlight, with human rights activists calling for a charter to protect our freedom to protest after police did their best to stop the pro-Palestine vigil earlier this week. Meanwhile, the Master Builders Association, and this will probably come up in our show tonight, reported the lowest number of home building starts in a decade and worsening apprenticeship figures across all building trades. And given that we're already suffering serious trade shortages, this is quite significant. Meanwhile, a new study from QUT proposes that the supposedly 13 million spare bedrooms in Australia should be rented out to ease the housing crisis, not to mention the million empty homes. At Liverpool Council, Ned Manoon has been resoundingly re-elected as mayor, and one of his major projects, the new Liverpool Library, called Yellamundi, and designed by architects FJC Studio, has been shortlisted as one of the best libraries in the world. Closer to home, at Central Station, the scrapping of the government's plan to build over the train lines at the back of the station has brought applause from some, who considered it always nutty, and dismay from others who consider it a lost opportunity, not to mention the $130 million already spent on consultant fees, so go figure. And at WestConnex, the ghastly, if you know it, WestConnex Junction at Sydney Park, Sydney Transport is behaving like any old developer and forgetting its promises to build things like cycleways and pedestrian ways and other things that we were promised, including masses of new parkland. And at the Edgecliff Centre, even closer to home, plans have been lodged for a redevelopment which will involve a 35-storey residential tower and a 13-storey office building. This may or may not be a good thing. My guest this evening, though, to talk about this really important, urgent question of whether Sydney is actually ready for what you might call slums, is the president of the Planning Institute of Australia, brackets New South Wales Division, Sue Weatherley. Sue, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for that introduction.
Look, let's talk a little bit about history. I'm interested because, it's my understanding that planning as we know it now is fairly new as a profession, and that it came into being almost specifically to stop the kinds of apartments we're now talking about. Is that right?
Well, I think communities have planned their towns and their communities forever. As long as we've lived together as a group, we've made decisions about how we will lay out.
A bit ad hoc, though, I imagine.
Yes,
broadly speaking.
but what we now know is sort of like modern town planning probably has its growth or beginnings in the Industrial Revolution, because the movement of people from being very rural based into towns meant that there was a construction boom and housing crisis. And what was learnt from that is that without proper planning and thought, what we ended up with was generally slums. And the Industrial Revolution led to communities and like families of 10 and 12 living in one room with no windows. Yes. That was the consequence of that, until someone stepped in and we started to get things like the Garden Cities movement, for example, where people said if we improve the quality of the environment within which people live, we will actually improve their lives. And I think ever since then, the process of the evolution of planning from that time has always had that as the basis. If we improve the places where people live, we improve the quality of their lives and their well-being, their health, There's social interactions. All those things get much better if we think about how we plan the place where people live.
Yes, and so it comes down to what we mean by improving lives, and also what the cumulative costs of that are, because we now know that the Garden City idea has rebounded on us somewhat and is generating car-dependent suburbia and sprawl and all the other things that we're now trying to remediate with, with denser living. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? And that it sort of flips on its head and goes full circle. But we need greater density, don't we, in our cities?
Oh, absolutely. There can be no doubt that the density of Sydney as a whole is completely, well, it's on the low side. I was going to say completely inappropriate. We can't have sprawl forever, but we actually need to have that balanced. We can't just have sprawl and tall. It can't be just a suburban house on a lot out at West Hoxton Park or a tower in Macquarie Park. We actually need a lot in between, and we need to think about how we're going to do that. And it's not as easy as people think, because we actually have suburbs that were created from the 1930s to the 1960s, and the lot sizes don't necessarily work really well to convert to, a terrace that we might have in Paddington or Surrey Hills. They don't just quite. Can't pick them up and put them on a lot like that.
I had a suburban house, and I was desperate to put 4 terrace houses. You could easily put 4 of the terrace houses I lived in on this lot, but we were not allowed to by the council. So, look, I want to come back to that question of the missing middle, because that's really interesting. But first, is that business of improving people's lives, is that why you personally became a planner? Would you say?
Absolutely, and that's what keeps you in the profession, I think. A
certain amount of idealism.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you go into battle some days. You don't win every battle, but I think in the end, if we can win the war in terms of a proper conversation about the right city, I mean, one of the problems of suburbia has been, the dominance of the car. We now have places where if you don't own 2 cars...
or 3.
Or 3 in some cases, you can't get around. We just can't be building a city based on cars. If we spent, half the money on, say social housing or public housing as we do on new motorways...
Or even public transport.
Or
maybe for the other half.
or motorways or on open space... would actually probably not be quite in the problem we are today.
Yes, agreed. So, look, let's talk about this new report then, because the Productivity Commissioner, Peter Achterstraat, has recommended in his official report on housing supply that developers be allowed essentially to evade the current rules, which are SEP 65 and the Apartment Design Guidelines, to build, and this is his explicit recommendation, to build much smaller, tiny apartments with no sunshine, no solar access. So that's right, isn't it? That's what he proposes.
Yes, he was slightly dismissive of the notion that a sunny apartment is a important consideration, and certainly recommended that the minimum sizes for apartments be removed. Now,
so we don't currently require that all apartments get sun, do we? It's something like 60% get sun for 2 hours a day or something.
60 or 70%. I'm not doing DAs all the time, but it's so it's not all.
It's a proportion. And a proportion of the time.
That's right, yes. So they're not sunny every day. I mean, part of the argument presented in the report is that people might have amenity in other ways other than having to have access to solar access, so that northern face view.
Yeah.
Look, and I'd say if you were living in the rocks and looking at Sydney Harbour, you might say, well,
let's
the
go
other
and
way.
sit in the sun.
Yeah. But if you're on the other side of the harbour, you're looking the other way. You're not getting the benefit of solar access, but you probably got a much bigger apartment with 2 or 3 different aspects and the opportunity to have
and a
sun.
harbour view. Yeah.
Yes, and aspects for sun in the morning and sun in the afternoon, even if you haven't got that northerly aspect. Whereas there's lots of places, I would say, if you took that requirement away, they would be fairly miserable apartments to live in.
Yeah.
I know the Committee for Sydney says, plants wouldn't survive. But I think more importantly, people won't survive. We know that access to sun, that sense of well-being is all about the places that you live.
And if you're in a small apartment like that with no particular view and no particular, street life around you, that little bit of sunshine in the morning, say, can be an absolute godsend.
Well, from a marketing point of view, we all know that a north-facing dwelling is
This is what we love.
That's what we love. And there's a reason we love it. And it's not just a made-up thing by the real estate agents. There's actually a reason that we love it.
It makes you feel better.
It does make you feel better.
Yes. So this idea that, and it's not the same, obviously, but it reminds me of that window tax that was imposed in the UK, and particularly in 17th century London, which was meant to be a progressive tax, but it had these huge unintended consequences, well, of course, of people either building houses with fewer or no windows or boarding up existing windows for poor people. Rich people were fine, they could afford windows. Can you tell us about that? Because that's a pretty interesting moment in history, isn't it?
Yes, it's one of those things where I often reflect on that when I think about how our tax system works. But there was that unintended consequence. It was meant to say that if you're a really wealthy person with a grand house with lots of windows, you'd pay
more.
You'd pay more, and yes, in theory, but you could probably afford to pay more, and who cares? But if you're a slum landlord, the best way to increase your profit was to take the windows out or to build the...
Sorry, love.
Yeah, that's right. Too bad, too sad.
Yeah.
You've got a door, that's enough. We're not putting windows in because I have to pay extra for that. And why would I do that? And the market will respond to the messages and that they are given. And in that case, the landlords acted accordingly.
Yes, because it was the landlords that were responsible.
That's right.
So it's hardly surprising that children ended up with rickets and all the other diseases that then became rampant.
That's right. I mean, and that's the extreme example of what could happen in badly considered public policy. But it's also a case that does really reinforce that issue that we have planning rules that set out minimum standards to ensure that we do consider amenity in the quality of the new buildings that are being built today.
And this seems, forgive me for being naive, but this seems to be fundamental to civilization to me, that we have minimum ceiling heights, we have minimum window sizes, we have a minimum amount of ventilation. Why wouldn't you mandate a minimum amount of sunshine just because, here we are in this huge sunny continent, and isn't that really a human right?
Oh, I would think so, and I've had some interesting discussions with applicants and proponents who thought it would be okay to build buildings that overshadowed public spaces, and we'll solve that problem by putting a heliostat in, which is a big mirror to reflect the sunshine.
As happened at Central Park.
Yes, so don't do that. We should build around those problems. We have plenty of land in Sydney. That is not the problem. We just need some really good ideas about the best way to use that land. And we don't have to overshadow each other. We can build apartments that have access to sunshine, because I think the other part of the proposal was about the size of apartments. But we know the biggest challenge for us is that more and more families are living in apartments. It seems counterintuitive to in the same... Knowing this, to then propose that we would...
Make them smaller and smaller.
We would allow them to become smaller and smaller. At the moment, I think the mix has to be, 10% have to be one bedroom and 10% have to be 3-bedroom. The 2-bedroom apartment is the popular... using that from a construction developer point of view, it's easy to sell, easy to consider, but it's not really meeting the needs of families at all. And if we think about all the other things that families need in apartments, including play space, they need areas for storage. Where do the kids' bikes go?
They do, yes.
Where do the kids' bikes go?
And the toys and the books.
There you go. So we're not putting that... In fact, at the moment, we do put families, and sometimes multi-generational families are living in 2-bedroom apartments now.
Which is just about impossible.
Yes.
It's ironic and interesting, isn't it, that in places like Potts Point, which probably has the highest proportion of singles in the country, I would think, developers are busy going to court in order to knock down bed sets and replace them with 4-bedroom luxury apartments, which will probably still be occupied by one person, but huge apartments, whereas these small, squitty, mean apartments won't be built in places like Potts Point. They'll be built in places like, I imagine, Helston Park or, I don't know, Penrith, and probably in suburban places where people will be forced to live much too closely together.
Yes, they'll be in locations where people can't afford $5 million. Yes, don't really have a choice, and they'll buy what they can afford, and it won't necessarily meet their needs because that's all that's available. And I do worry that we are creating a problem for future generations. Overcrowding of housing. So we go back to the Industrial Revolution. Overcrowding of housing was a real problem at that time.
What was that famous book, Nothing Gained by Overcrowding, and Raymond Unwin? Yep.
And so
there was that whole philanthropic movement to
absolutely.
Fix that.
This was all about making people's lives better. So I don't think we should give that up. I don't think we shouldn't trade that off.
And we shouldn't feel that we're forced to find a sticking plaster for this urgent situation.
And there are lots of things that we can do. And the government, it's clear when you look at the numbers and the figures in the terms of how much social housing we need and how little social housing has been provided in the last 30 years. Basically, all levels of government, all flavours of government have virtually stopped building. At the wheel. Yes, have stopped building additional social housing. There's been replacements, but not much new stuff at all. We've gone from 30 years ago, 6% of the population lived in social housing. We're now down to 3%.
Yeah, and in Paris it's 35 or 40 or something.
And all the very expensive cities we often get compared against have a much higher rate of
public housing.
That's right. I think Singapore the other day,
it was like 80.
It was a really high number. It was an enormous number. Their housing is the market housing is more expensive than ours, but most people aren't in that market.
No,
most people are in government-provided housing.
And very high-quality government-provided housing.
As a general rule, yes, in Singapore.
That is a very fine moment for us to stop and have a quick music break. That was Robert Plant, the famous Robert Plant, all the way from Led Zeppelin, and Alison Krauss, also famous, with a song called Can't Let Go, and from an album called Raise the Roof in 2021. I'm Elizabeth Farrelly, here with you on the Sydneyist at Eastside Radio on 89.7 FM, and I'm speaking with Sue Weatherley, President of the New South Wales Division of the Planning Institute of Australia. Sue, so look, we've just been talking about tiny apartments and sunless apartments. And before we leave that subject, I just want to ask you about, because there's a counter argument, isn't there, about, well, isn't the situation so desperate that a small house is better than, or a small dwelling is better than no dwelling? So that's sort of, what about homeless people? What about people who are just absolutely desperate? Is the desperation argument a good one?
I think it's easy to be so concerned about the problem, the current problem, is to latch on to an immediate solution. But if we do this badly, these are the problems for the future for us to solve.
Yeah.
And we can't create problems where these buildings are uninhabitable in a few years' time, because people don't want to live in a building that was constructed, tiny apartments, not enough sun access, all those sort of things, no access to open space, all the other elements that the report talked about that could be reconsidered. I think we need to be braver as a society, and hopefully our political leaders can be braver as well and say there are things we can do today to really help homelessness and ensuring people have access to housing and treat it as a human right and respond appropriately. I get a bit annoyed when people say we have a housing crisis, and I go, well, it would be much better if someone said, but this is how I define the crisis. Is the crisis that there's not enough market housing, or is the crisis there's not enough social and affordable housing? And if you say it's just the market housing, then you address the problem in one particular way. If it's about social and an affordable rental housing, then we need to address the problem in a very different way. And I don't think there's enough time done defining the problem, or what is the outcome for housing that we want in Australia.
So is our mistake relying entirely on developers to provide everything? Is that the problem?
I think it's a mistake if we think the market will solve the current housing accessibility issues.
Markets don't usually see prices drop, do they?
No, and in fact, we would have, I think, some significant problems if there were massive reductions in the market for housing generally. Although, you only have to watch what the market's saying about housing prices, particularly units. In areas where there's lots of units, suddenly the prices drop a little bit over time, they even out. But we often try to make these comparisons about the market and what's happening in the market, and we treat it like it's one market. But this is not apples and apples. This is oranges and pears and pineapples and it's all everything I had for breakfast this morning with my muesli. They're different markets meeting different needs in different locations, in different accessibilities. So the problem is one solution is not going to solve this problem. And I would say the worst thing we can do right now is reduce amenity standards to solve the problem we have today, when the real areas that we need to tackle, including are the fact that we don't build enough social and affordable housing, full stop. If we do not address that and make a seismic change to that approach, building small apartments without windows, for example, is not going to solve any problem, because they still won't be accessible to large proportions of the population.
No, that's right. They won't be cheap.
Because if the market's building these smaller apartments with poor sun access, homeless people aren't accessing them.
So it's interesting, isn't it? There's a kind of rivalry between architects and planners as a rule, and I shared a stage with quite a well-known architect the other night who used the phrase "the dead hand of planning." But it's interesting that on this issue, planners, architects, academics, everybody is united. This is not the answer. So it seems to me it must be in the end a governance issue. Is that right? Is it back to government? Has government misunderstood this?
Well,
would you say?
I think we need to.
Or they're just not listening to it.
Well, I think we need to separate, and to be absolutely fair to the Department of Planning and the Minister and the government as a whole. The Productivity Commission's report is a report with a series of recommendations, and their response to it was, "We will consider those recommendations." I think there's enough in, if I have my super positive, optimistic hat on, I think many of those suggestions will be rejected. Particularly the solar access one and a couple of the other ones. I think, we can't go back. We can't go back.
But there's already been a lot of deregulation in the interest of supposedly increasing supply, hasn't there, in the TODs and various things. So where environmental regulations and heritage protections have been removed.
Yeah, one of the things So
they use that as a strategy already.
Yeah. Although I do say, I think with the TODs, one of the things that they were sort of kept on saying, but new development will still have to meet the apartment design guide and
until we repeal that as well. Yeah.
Yes. So
maybe they won't. Maybe they'll do the decent thing.
Like I say, I'm being optimistic and positive about it. And I think the fact that all those groups, including people like the Committee for Sydney, are saying, don't do this.
Yes.
There are other things we should do. This appeared to me a bit of a throwaway consideration. Like, we just need... What more can we add to the list of recommendations almost? Because it just doesn't...
You think you would have asked someone, though, wouldn't you?
Well, there would be certain people with vested interest who would believe that you should reduce some of these standards. But I don't think that's in the long-term benefit of the community.
All right. Well, let's talk about one of the other things that's brought up. And you mentioned this too, the lack of tradies. To what extent is that a cause of the housing crisis, do you think?
And this way, you read the totality of the Productivity Commission's report, and they identify the real problem they see from the market response is feasibility, and they do recognise the problem of lack of tradies. And you have to say that very deliberate running down of the TAFE system.
I know. It's like, and what did you think was going to happen?
Yes, I go, okay, now we haven't got enough tradies. So
what a surprise.
Yes. And I go, and even I read an article from 2017, so what are we now, 7 years ago, where they were predicting there would be a shortage of tradies.
It's not like we didn't know it was going to happen.
No, and we've got to stop ignoring those signals, I think.
We're running out of time, as ever, and this is a great conversation. So let me just ask you two very quick questions. How can we make lifelong renting a decent and affordable option for people? Is that a possibility? And does that come within planning remit, or is that...
It's not completely outside our lane, because if we're going to talk about more apartments and the fact that many people will never be able to afford to own that property, just as they couldn't before.
Yes.
In the 1990s, I think it was still only 30% of the population was still renting in the private market, with probably no chance of owning their own property. So I think we got to start framing all our land policies around the principles of being what's best for tenants and occupiers rather than landlords and owners.
So we're talking rent protections.
We are talking about rent protections and a few of those things, and also some of the strata law reform is desperately needed to protect building property owners and because we will still end up, no matter what happens, we'll end up with lots of multiple landlords in a single building. How do we manage that better?
It's huge, isn't it? All right, final question. If you were, let's say you're running the Department of Planning, you had 3 wishes for Sydney, what would they be? What would you change tomorrow if you could?
Well, the first thing I'd do is I'd stop just talking about 5 years. I think we do need to get the next version of the Metropolitan Strategy out. And we need to be talking about the next...
And then stick with it.
10, 20, 40 years, because we need to have planning. If part of the problem for the housing is that we didn't do it beforehand. I'd like a more certain and a planning system that's more certain and greater clarity, so it's clear what the rules are.
Good heavens. That's radical.
I know. We should take a bit of effort.
Short words, few of them.
And I'd like to see us all being a bit braver in terms of some of the decision-making that we make.
So more governance, I suppose, of housing.
That might be a good way to put it,
I look forward to that. Well, that's it, folks. We're coming to the end. It's a wrap. Next week, we'll be looking at the fight to save the Potts Point bedsit. We're handing over now to Yone on the Vinyl Frontier. Thank you to everybody for joining us this evening on The Sydneyist, and thank you to Sue Weatherley for being wonderful.
Thank you very much.
It's fabulous. Hello, city dwellers. Ever wondered what makes Sydney tick? Well, hold on to your skyscrapers because the Sydneyist is about to unravel the secrets of the concrete jungle like never before. Together, we'll explore this vibrant metropolis from its foundations to its penthouses. We're not just talking about bricks and mortar, we're talking the soul of Sydney. I'm Elizabeth Farrelly. Join me Thursdays at 6 p.m. for the Sydneyist.